colorblind, have low vision, or another print disability that makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org. And good morning. Your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service now presents a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News for Monday, January 5th. Your readers today are
Ed Howard
and Ted Pajacki. And we begin with a look at the weather on this Victory Monday. And it's an interesting week because the Bills are heading down to Jacksonville to play, and the weather is going to be getting more southern-like as we go through the week. Today we're going to have some periods of snow accumulating 1 to 2 inches. The untreated surfaces may be slippery, so be careful. The high will be 35. Tonight it'll be cloudy with a low of 30, with periods of rain tomorrow afternoon. And that's when the temperatures start going up. The high will be 41 tomorrow. Wednesday will be a bit of snow and rain at times in the morning. And then as we get towards the weekend, the temperatures will be skyrocketing into the 50s. So we may have a little bit of flooding in our future here, but it'll be warm. But then for the Bills game, remind us it's winter. It's going to be cold again down in the 30s and 20s. The normal high and low for this date are 33 and 21. The record high was 66 in 1874, and the record low was -7 in 1981. Last year, the temperature, the high was 27, and the low was 22. And yesterday, the national extremes were the high was in Homestead, Florida, a comfortable 83 degrees, and the low was in Holton, Maine, a rather frigid -18.
Well, Ted, not surprisingly, the lead story in today's news from the front page of the Buffalo News has to do with the Buffalo Bills, but not the game itself. Rather, the good news is tailgating will follow the Bills to the new stadium.
Traditions live on.
And the story goes on and says, Chris Bolt arrived around 8:30 a.m., parked his pickup in the usual spot, and set up the crock pots of brisket, pulled pork, and Polish stuffed cabbage. I'm hungry already.
That sounds good to me.
It was Sunday game day as usual, but it was also anything but normal for Bills fans like Bolt, many of whom were saying farewell to the only home of the Bills they've ever known. It is bittersweet, said Bolt, who recalled his parents taking him to the stadium when he was just a kid. Those moments led to years of parking lot tailgates with friends and family and loads of happy memories. Bolt splurged on seat licenses and season tickets inside the more than $2 billion stadium under construction that promises a level of luxury and comfort fans in Western New York haven't experienced before. For Bolt, that includes a separate entrance and a bartender for his section. But no matter the amenities inside the stadium, Bolt and other Bills fans insisted they'll still be doing plenty of tailgating outside in the elements. It'll be great in there, but there's not going to be anything that can take away from doing this, showing up in the cold no matter what types of conditions, said Justin Jenkins of Amherst. Jenkins wore an Eric Bolts jersey and snow pants and arrived with friends at a private parking lot off Southwestern Boulevard around 10 a.m. to bid adieu to the home that's of some of the greatest moments in Bills sports history. He and friends, many of them buddies from his days at Amherst High School, have been gathering at pregame tailgates for years. They started out just showing up with a 30-pack of beer and eventually evolved the outing to include themed appetizers and entrees and a television playing out of the hatchback of a car. This Sunday's menu included jambalaya and chicken noodle soup. If one thing is constant, it's the tailgate, Jenkins said. The fandom doesn't end, and the tailgate doesn't end just because it's a new stadium. Steve Dalton of Amherst suggested that tailgating may even grow with the new stadium, especially for Bills fans who don't want to shell out big money for a seat license and more expensive season tickets. A lot of people have been priced out of the building. They might still want to come to tailgate. You'll still have this, said Dalton. At Hammer's Lot, a popular and boisterous tailgate lot on Abbott Road, The festivities were in full swing 4 hours before game time. At the back of the lot, fans took swigs of Polish liquor out of a bowling ball as Daniel Whale cooked bacon on a saw blade atop an old Pinto. Wade said tailgating will remain, largely because it's so personal to people. Yes, there's a new stadium, but it's not ushering in a whole new group of people. Your tradition in the parking lot stays the same. Now, you're just going into a new, more modernized building, he said. I don't think any of this materially changes. Next year, we will be in this exact same spot, doing the exact same thing, and I think you can go to a lot of tailgates, and that's what they're going to look you in the eye and tell you. Jeremy West of Derby showed up at Milligan's lot around 9 a.m. and said others were already there 2 hours earlier. West said he was torn by the loss of the stadium, where he saw his first game in 1995, when the Bills squared off against Dan Marino and the Miami Dolphins. There's nothing ever going to replace that game. That's 8 years old, first time in the route with my dad, said West. It's never going to be the same, but it's time for a change, I guess. The tailgate, however, isn't changing for West Group. I'll still be here every Sunday tailgating, he said. Being out here all day tailgating, we can bring some of that into the new stadium because we're out here in the elements all day. I think you get in there and it doesn't really leave you. James Mullane of Cheektowaga committed to seat licenses with 5 of his friends, and he wondered what the impact the new stadium will have on parking prices in the area and ultimately tailgating next season. Everything in the new stadium is probably going to cost a lot more money. People are already spending a lot more money on tickets alone. And that's where Mullane's group Parks now charges $60, double what it charged 5 years ago, he said. If it goes much higher, Mullane said he'll consider using the lot and perhaps cut back on the tailgating. I think the prices remain relatively stable to what they are, then I think tailgating will always be a thing.
Well, this may be difficult to believe, but there is other news in the world.
There is.
There is. And Congress is poised to weigh in on Venezuela upon returning. What the United States does next in Venezuela, and in the Western Hemisphere more broadly, are questions that loom large as the 119th Congress returns to work this week for its second session. On the heels of the U.S. military's abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro early Saturday and the administration's planned prosecution of Maduro on weapons and drug charges, Democrats and at least a handful of Republicans will push for Congress to make its voice heard on the matter starting this week. At least one vote appears likely in the Senate in the days ahead on requiring congressional authorization for additional U.S. military actions in or against Venezuela. By the end of January, lawmakers may also decide whether to withhold defense appropriations for such operations. At least classified briefings on Venezuela, if not public hearings, are also in the works. It's time for Congress to get its ass off the couch and do what the Constitution mandates that we do, Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia and a member of the Armed Service and Foreign Relations panels, told reporters on Saturday. The Senate is poised to vote next week on a resolution by Kaine that would block U.S. military action within or against Venezuela unless it is authorized by Congress, he said. It would be the latest of several so far ill-fated attempts to assert congressional prerogatives. What's more, Kaine said whenever the House-Senate compromise version of the two chambers' 2026 defense appropriation bills comes up for a vote, the Senate will decide whether to consider an amendment by Senator Jeff Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon, that would prohibit the use of funds to prosecute military action in or against Venezuela. Lawmakers hope to clear the defense spending measure by January 30th, when stopgap funding will expire. If passed as prologue, however, the attempts to rein in the president's military actions will fall narrowly short in partisan votes. Lawmakers' reactions on Saturday to the president's actions in Venezuela, with Republicans almost universally backing him and virtually all Democrats decrying the action. President Trump's military operation in Venezuela is just the opening chapter of an as-yet unwritten story. Trump told reporters on Saturday the U.S. will run Venezuela for the time being. The president said a small number of American forces may be needed in that country for that purpose, and he did not rule out additional and potential lethal U.S. military action there. We've been in quagmires in the Americas for decades, if not centuries, because of decisions like this, Kaine said. The unresolved questions only start with how the U.S. will oversee governance in Venezuela and whether there will be resistance from the Venezuelans. Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested on Sunday that the United States would not take a day-to-day approach to governing Venezuela, other than enforcing an existing quarantine on the country, a turnaround after Trump announced a day earlier that the U.S. would be running Venezuela following Maduro's ouster. Rubio's statements on Talk TV shows seems designated to temper concerns about whether the assertive American action to achieve regime change might again produce a prolonged foreign intervention or failed attempt at nation building. They stood in contrast to Trump's broad but vague claims that the U.S. would at least temporarily run the rich nation. Comments that suggested some sort of governing structure under which Caracas would be controlled by Washington. Rubio offered a more nuanced take, saying the U.S. would continue to enforce a quarantine that was already in place on sanctioned tankers before Maduro was removed from power, and use that leverage as a means to press policy change in Venezuela. And so, that's the sort of control the president is pointing to when he says that, Rubio said on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday. We continue with that quarantine, and we expect to see that there will be changes, not just in the way the industry is run for the benefit of the people, but also so that they stop the drug trafficking. The blockade on sanctioned tankers, some of which have been seized by the U.S., remains in place, and that's a tremendous amount of leverage that will continue to be in place until we see changes that not just further the national interest of the United States, which is number one, but also that lead to a better future for the people of Venezuela, he added. Even before the operation that nabbed Maduro, experts were already questioning the legality of aspects of the administration's pressure campaign on Venezuela, including the deadly bombing of boats accused of trafficking drugs that some scholars said stretched the boundaries of international law. Many lawmakers are also wondering aloud if the ouster of Maduro is part of a larger plan to remake the Western Hemisphere and perhaps Greenland by force if necessary. The White House's November national security strategy said some U.S. military forces would be repositioned from other regions to the Western Hemisphere to deal with problems such as drug trafficking and migration, and to establish or expand access in strategically important locations. The strategy also called for bolstering U.S. maritime forces in the region and for targeted deployments to secure the border and defeat cartels, including, where necessary, the use of lethal force to replace the failed law enforcement-only strategy of the last several decades. Rubio on Saturday described the taking of Maduro as a law enforcement operation supported by the U.S. military. But he also suggested that Cuba's leaders in particular should worry about their own fate. If I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned at least a little bit, Rubio said. Trump, for his part, told reporters his administration wants to surround ourselves with good neighbors. He said, Cuba is not doing very well right now, and it's a failing nation. Trump said Cuba is very similar to Venezuela in the sense that we want to help the people of Cuba. Representative Adam Smith of Washington, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, is worried about what might be next across the region. Based on the administration's national security strategy, I am deeply concerned that this may be an indication of more to come as the administration seeks to dominate the Western Hemisphere, Smith said in a statement.
You're listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service, and the time is 15 minutes past the hour, and it's time now to turn to the editorial page. And today's editorial is headlined, Fix for Returnables. A better bottle bill will help New York businesses, consumers, and the environment. It may be impossible to fully remedy recycling's fatal flaws, but there are actions New York State can take. Governor Kathy Hochul has an opportunity to consider updated bottle bill legislation that would widen the range of accepted bottles to include non-carbonated beverages, wine, liquor, and hard cider, among other beverage containers, and double the return from 5 cents to 10 cents per bottle. Consumers may be familiar with legislation known as the Bigger, Better Bottle Bill. This upgraded version might serve consumers and the state better. Businesses would face certain costs for upgrading their systems and hiring more labor, but given the pressure the redemption centers have been under, it's well worth the effort. And of course, there's the environmental impact of incentivizing people to keep bottles out of the landfills. As News Albany Bureau Chief Robert Gavin reported, environmentalists have been pushing bottle bills since Governor Hugh Carey signed the New York State Returnable Container Act into law in 1982. Now, with the new legislative session starting Wednesday, a coalition of 300 groups from downstate to upstate are urging Hochul to consider a bottle bill they say could bring in $100 million in annual state revenue and save taxpayers $108 million. According to the coalition, in addition to generating an estimated $100 million in revenue, enactment of the bill would be a savings to taxpayers by reducing the money local governments spend for cleanup and disposal of container trash. The coalition also highlighted the State Department of Environmental Conservation's 2023 New York State Solid Waste Management Plan, which called to support a modernization of the law and creation of a task force to reduce fraudulent sales and redemption activities. These are all worthy points the governor should consider. The groups, in a letter sent to Hochul on December 12th, also insisted that a handling fee which goes to redemption centers needs to increase to keep those businesses viable. The fees have remained the same for the past 15 years, but according to the groups, the costs of operating a business have increased, pushing 150 redemption centers out of business. These are key points made in another Voice piece by Tim Wozniak, who owns the Quick and Easy Bottle Return in Cheektowaga, and mentions the state's hundreds of bottle and can redemption centers across the state and the thousands who would be employed who would be adversely affected if these changes are not enacted. It would also help countless charities and not-for-profit organizations. As Wozniak said in his Another Opinion piece, the costs for redemption centers have risen far too long without relief. A bottle and can redemption center earns a handling fee of 3.5 cents for each empty it processes a rate that has remained unchanged since 2008. Expenses like rent, utilities, insurance, and gas have all increased greatly during that period, Wozniak wrote. Arguing that the state legislature, which sets the handling fee rate, quote, has refused to take action, unquote, Wozniak noted that many bills have languished in committee, been forgotten, and eventually died. A number of groups opposed the legislation, including the New York State Conference of Teamsters, including Western New York-based Joint Council 46, as well as the National Supermarket Association. A few years ago, this page suggested a compromise, requiring a deposit on more containers, but keeping the amount consistent as an experiment. In other words, the size of the deposit would be increased later if experience showed it to be useful. Then, as now, the focus was on keeping bottles out of New York's waterways and landfills.
Next, we have the Another Voice column, which is on mental health today. And today's issue was submitted by the Dr. Catherine M. Durant, who is the founder and executive director of Whole Wellness Counseling. And the headline is, "Do not confuse artificial intelligence chat box with therapy." Imagine a parent who, in the aftermath of a child's death, discovers their child shared their fatal hopelessness with a chatbot. People often turn to predictive text systems presented as conversational partners to avoid human judgment. As the director of a mental health organization, I see daily the damage that surfaces when people hide their despair. Artificial intelligence is marketed as on-demand mental health support, and in some cases as a substitute for professional care. But when children and families are in crisis, immediacy without clinical discernment can deepen harm rather than prevent it. Therapy is a relational, interpretive practice grounded in human perception and ethics. Clinicians respond not only to words, but also to what cannot be typed. AI cannot perceive or respond to posture, tone, expression, cultural meaning, or lived context. The FDA Digital Health Advisory Committee has warned that AI mental health apps marketed as therapy are offering diagnoses and treatment without adequate oversight. These systems generate errors and misleading guidance at a rate that would demand corrective action by licensed professionals. The American Psychological Association has cautioned that such tools are unsafe, particularly for minors. People in acute psychological distress are disproportionately drawn to AI chatbots because these systems are designed to solicit disclosure and reward vulnerability with attention without the capacity to protect or care. New York's recent rules governing AI companions are utterly inadequate because they mandate unenforceable disclosure and referral actions while evading the core problem, and that is artificial intelligence lacks judgment, ethics, and accountability. Governor Hochul and the legislature must prohibit AI mental health apps unless they function as supervised tools within the care of licensed mental health professionals. Clearly warn the public about the absence of enforceable safety standards, invest in the mental health workforce, and expand access to evidence-based, human-delivered care. Do not confuse novelty with progress or convenience with compassion. Automating mental health care diminishes it, and the consequences fall most heavily on those already most vulnerable.
Well, next up we have today's editorial cartoon, and this one comes from Mike Lukovich who writes for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and today's single-panel cartoon features Lucifer, the devil himself. And we see the devil in hell, surrounded by flames, and he's standing there with horns on his head and his pitchfork in his hand. And he's standing in front of a sign, and the sign has skulls on either side of it, and it's up on posts and so on. And originally the sign said, "The Devil's Playground," but along has come somebody who has put the sign that says now, "The Trump Devil's Playground." And Lucifer in the in the speech box there is uttering a profanity. So apparently the Devil's Playground has been renamed the Trump Devil's Playground, and I'm going to guess that this has something to do with perhaps Trump putting his name on the Kennedy Center as well, although I wouldn't see that being the devil's territory. But I describe, and you can decide what it means.
That's right. It's a tough one to interpret, I think. We turn now to the national opinion pieces, and our first one comes to us from John Shaw from the Chicago Tribune. And the headline for this opinion piece is Nancy Pelosi, gifted politician, stellar stateswoman. The difference between a politician and a statesman, said James Freeman Clarke, a 19th century American theologian and writer, is that the politician thinks about the next election, while the statesman thinks about the next generation. Nancy Pelosi, a Democratic Congresswoman from California and former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, has inhabited the rarefied worlds of both formidable politician and history-making stateswoman. During her nearly 4-decade career in Congress, Pelosi has forged a complex and consequential legacy. Vilified on the right, lionized on the left, and a full participant in myriad contentious legislative battles, Pelosi's legacy is difficult to clearly discern. Few dispute that Pelosi, who announced that she will retire in 2027, has been a skilled and successful politician. She led her party in the House for 20 years, raised $1.3 billion for Democratic candidates, was twice elected Speaker, and championed significant health care, environmental, economic, and civil rights legislation. She is often referred to as one of the House's most successful modern speakers. I believe that history will also depict Pelosi as an impressive stateswoman. 3 aspects of her statesmanship are compelling and worthy of reflection. First, she's been a visionary leader. For a practical politician, Pelosi has frequently looked to the future and fought for policies with long-term consequences. This was most evident in her lengthy and tenacious quest for comprehensive health care reform. Pelosi played an essential role in crafting the Affordable Care Act and a singular role in securing its passage in Congress. When faced with extraordinary legislative obstacles, she responded with utter determination. At a press conference when health care reform appeared on the brink of failure, Pelosi presented her way forward. We go through the gate, and if the gate's closed, you go over the fence. If the fence is too high, we'll pole vault in. If that doesn't work, we'll parachute in. But we're going to get health care reform passed for the American people. The ACA is a landmark law, but it's also an imperfect one. In a better functioning political system, such as the one we used to have, Democrats and Republicans would have spent the last 15 years improving the law. Instead, the GOP has called for its repeal and replacement, but never offered an alternative. Democrats, in response, have been defensive in protecting their historic accomplishment. Continuing skirmishes over the law do not minimize the scope of Pelosi's achievement. Second, while Pelosi has been willing to set aside partnership for the national good, When the American economy began to unravel in 2008, the final year of George W. Bush's presidency, Pelosi had every short-term political incentive to stand back, watch the crisis intensify, and encourage the American public to blame Bush and his Republican colleagues for that meltdown. Instead, she stepped forward and helped assemble and pass a politically toxic but substantively sound package that stabilized the economy. It's worth noting that several months later, with the economy still fragile, the newly inaugurated President Barack Obama reached out to the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, and the House GOP leader, John Boehner, and asked for their support for a follow-up package. Both declined to help. McConnell's chief legislative priority was to make Obama a one-term president. Molly Ball, Pelosi biographer, summarizes Pelosi's 2008 financial crisis statesmanship succinctly. And this is a quote from the book here. She bailed a Republican president out of a mess of his own making for the good of the country at enormous political risk. End quote. Third, Pelosi has been a voice of caution, forbearance, and wisdom. America's decision to go to war in Iraq in 2003 is widely regarded as one of the worst foreign policy mistakes in the nation's history. The war and its aftermath gravely damaged the reputation of the United States and disrupted the Middle East. Yet, most of the American foreign policy establishment initially supported the war. When Congress considered the use of force resolution for Iraq in the fall of 2002, Pelosi vehemently opposed it. Speaking on the floor of the House, Pelosi pleaded with fellow lawmakers and the Bush administration to slow down and think clearly. Strikingly precision, Pelosi warned that an American war in Iraq would be bloody, costly, divert the nation from its battle against terrorism, and damage U.S. global prestige. If we resolve this issue diplomatically, we can show our strength as a great country, she said. Let us show our greatness. Her warnings were dismissed by Republicans and ignored by many congressional Democrats, including Senators Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Tom Daschle, and John Kerry, and U.S. Representative Richard Gephardt, all of whom were weighing 2004 presidential campaigns. In subsequent years, Pelosi tried valiantly and in vain to force the Bush administration to end the war and withdraw American troops. She was rebuffed, and the nation suffered. An authoritative study of the cost of the Iraq War by the Watson School at Brown University calculates that the U.S. spent $2 trillion in Iraq over 20 years. About 8,500 American troops and contractors were killed. 300,000 soldiers suffered debilitating injuries, and nearly 500,000 Iraqi civilians were killed. As her political career winds down, Pelosi is urging us to be vigilant and to protect our system of government and our way of life. American democracy is majestic, she said in 2022, but it is fragile. This is a wise warning from a gifted politician and a stellar stateswoman.
Well, our second column comes from Randy McRae, who writes for the Fulcrum, and the headline on her column is SNAP is a lifeline for millions and not a negotiating tool. Millions of families just survived the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Now, they're bracing again as politicians turn food assistance into a bargaining chip. Food assistance should not be subject to politics, yet the Trump administration is now requiring over 20 Democratic-led states to share sensitive SNAP recipient data, including Social Security and immigration details, or risk losing funding. Officials call it program integrity, but the effect is clear. Millions of low-income families may once again have their access to food threatened by political disputes. SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, supports over 40 million Americans. It was created to address real hunger in the country, acknowledging that wages have not kept pace with the cost of living. The program ensures that children, seniors, disabled adults, and working families can access food regardless of which party leads their state. Yet now, this vital assistance is being used for political leverage. During the shutdown, SNAP recipients held their breath, wondering whether their November benefits would come on time. Imagine heading into a holiday season not with excitement, but with anxiety about whether you can put food on the table. When the shutdown ended, families exhaled, but that relief didn't last long. Barely weeks later, the same families are once again living on high alert, scanning headlines to see whether their benefits could be delayed, reduced, or used as bargaining chips. The emotional whiplash is not a side effect, it is part of the program. People who already navigate daily precarity should not have to analyze political negotiations to determine whether their groceries will be covered next month. There's something profoundly wrong with a system that forces families into a cycle of uncertainty every time elected officials pick a new fight. A federal judge has already stepped in, temporarily blocking USDA's demand that 21 states and Washington, D.C. hand over sensitive personal data on SNAP recipients, including Social Security numbers and immigration-related information. Fraud is often invoked as a justification for stricter oversight, but SNAP fraud remains extremely low, historically around 1%, according to the USDA's own quality control data. Public programs must be accountable, but accountability cannot be the excuse for punitive policies. SNAP was designed to stabilize families and reduce hunger. It was never designed to be used as a carrot for compliant states or a stick for dissenting ones. If we let children starve out of political spite, we lose sight of who we claim to be as a nation.
In financial news, we have this headline: Trump's plan to revamp oil industry in Venezuela is facing major hurdles. President Trump's plan to take control of Venezuela's oil industry and ask American companies to revitalize it after capturing President Nicolas Maduro in a raid isn't likely to have a significant immediate impact on oil prices. Venezuela's oil industry is in disrepair after years of neglect and international sanctions, so it could take years and major investments before production can increase dramatically. But some analysts are optimistic that Venezuela could double or triple its current output of about 1.1 million barrels of oil a day to return to historic levels fairly quickly. Oil isn't traded over the weekend, so there wasn't an immediate impact on prices, but a major shift in prices isn't expected when the market does open today. Venezuela is a member of OPEC, so its production is already accounted for there, and there is currently a surplus of oil on the global market. Venezuela produces the kind of heavy crude oil needed for diesel fuel, asphalt, and other fuels for heavy equipment. Diesel is in short supply around the world because of the sanctions on oil from Venezuela and Russia, and because America's lighter crude oil can't easily replace it. Years ago, American refineries on the Gulf Coast were optimized to handle that kind of heavy crude at a time when U.S. oil production was failing, and Venezuelan and Mexican crude was plentiful. So refineries would love to have more access to Venezuela's crude because it would help them operate more efficiently, and it tends to be a little cheaper. But it's a complicated picture. Matthew Waxman, a Columbia University law professor who was a national security official, said seizing control of Venezuela's resources opens up additional legal issues. For example, a big issue will be who really owns Venezuela's oil, Waxman wrote in an email. An occupying military power can't enrich itself by taking another state's resources, but the Trump administration will probably claim that the Venezuelan government never rightfully held them. But Waxman, who served in the State and Defense Departments and on the National Security Council under Bush, noted that we've seen the administration talk very dismissively about international law when it comes to Venezuela.
Well, the Venezuela issue is going to create a new challenge for the president, and that is keeping the GOP in line. President Trump's military intervention in Venezuela will pose a fresh test of his ability to hold together a restive Republican coalition during a challenging election year. While most Republicans lined up behind the president in the immediate aftermath of the stunning U.S. mission to capture Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and bring him to the United States to face criminal charges, there were signs of unease across the spectrum within the party. In particular, Trump's comments about the U.S. positioning itself to run Venezuela have raised concerns that he is abandoning the America First philosophy that has long distinguished him from more traditional Republicans and helped fuel his political rise. This is the same Washington playbook that we are so sick and tired of, that doesn't serve the American people, but actually serves the big corporations, the banks, and the oil executives, outgoing GOP Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, a former Trump ally, told NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday. Those concerns were shared by some who are not as closely aligned with the party's far-right flank. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, a moderate who is one of the most vulnerable Republicans heading into the November midterms, said in a statement that, quote, "The only country that the United States should be running is the United States of America." Those comments reflect the sensitive dynamics between Trump and his fellow Republicans at the outset of an election year in which their party risks losing control of Congress. While the president remains the undisputed dominant force inside the GOP, the ironclad grip Trump had on the GOP has faced unusual challenges in recent months. Blocs of Republicans have come together to pressure Trump to release the Jeffrey Epstein files. Others have been vocal in encouraging Trump to take concerns about affordability more seriously. Few issues, however, are as central to Trump's political brand as the idea that ensuring that the U.S. does not get entangled in seemingly endless foreign conflicts at the expense of domestic priorities. During a 2016 Republican presidential debate, for example, he called the Iraq War a big fat mistake. By Saturday, Trump said he was not afraid of boots on the ground if that was deemed necessary, and he framed his actions in Venezuela as steps that are grounded in prioritizing the safety and security of Americans. As he articulated an aggressive vision of U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere, he told reporters that it was important to surround the U.S. with good neighbors.
Next is a look at the environment and at Antarctica as a frontier in flux. The Southern Ocean is one of the most remote places on Earth, but that doesn't mean it's tranquil. Tumultuous waves that can swallow vessels ensure that the Antarctic Peninsula has a constant drone of ocean. While it can be loud, the view is serene at first glance, but it's only deep blue water and blinding white ice. Several hundred yards off the coast, a small boat emerges with a couple dozen tourists in bright red jackets. They hold binoculars, hoping for a glimpse of the orcas, seals, and penguins that call this tundra home. They are in the Le Maire Channel, nicknamed the Kodak Gap, referring to the film and camera company because its picturesque, perfect cliffs and ice formations. This narrow strip of navigable water gives anybody who gets this far south a chance to see what is at stake as climate change, caused mainly by the burning of oil, gas, and coal, leads to a steady rise in global average temperature. The Antarctic Peninsula is one of the fastest warming places in the world. The ocean that surrounds it is also a major repository for carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. It captures and stores about 40% of the CO2 emitted by humans, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. On a recent day, Gentoo penguins with sport-like slender orange beaks and white spots above their eyes appeared to put on a show. They took breaks from their dives into the icy water to nest on an exposed rock. As the planet warms, they are migrating further south. They prefer to colonize rock and fish in open water, allowing them to grow in population. The Adelie penguins, however, don't have that same prognosis. The plump figures with short flippers and wide, bright eyes are not able to adapt the same way. By 2100, one study found climate change could threaten 60% of Adelie penguin colonies around Antarctica. They rely on ice to rest and escape predators. If the water gets too warm, it will kill off their food sources. From 2002 to 2020, about 140 billion metric tons of Antarctic ice melted per year, according to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. For tourists, Antarctica is still a giant glacial expanse that's home to only a select species that can tolerate such harsh conditions. For example, in the Drake Passage, tourists stand in wonder while watching orca whales swim in the dangerous strip of tumultuous ocean and pintado petrels soar above. The majestic views in Antarctica, however, likely will be starkly different in the decades ahead. The growing Gentoo penguin colonies, the shrinking pieces of floating ice, and the increasing instances of exposed rock in the Antarctic Peninsula all underscore a changing landscape.
Well, in Mideast news, with Iran reeling, protests provide increased pressure. Widening protests in Iran, sparked by the Islamic Republic's ailing economy, are putting new pressure on its theocracy. Tehran is still reeling from a 12-day war launched by Israel in June that saw the United States bomb nuclear sites in Iran. Economic pressure, which has intensified since September when the United Nations reimposed sanctions on the country over its atomic program, has put Iran's rial currency into a freefall, now trading at some 1.4 million rial to $1. Meanwhile, Iran's self-described Axis of Resistance, a coalition of countries and militant groups backed by Tehran, has been decimated in the years since the start of the Israel-Hamas war in 2023. A threat by President Trump warning Iran that if Tehran violently kills peaceful protesters, the U.S. will come to their rescue, has taken on new meaning after American troops captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Iran has installed a banner in Tehran warning that the United States and Israel that their soldiers will be killed if they take military action there. Demonstrations have reached over 170 locations in 25 of Iran's 31 provinces, the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency reported on Sunday. The death toll had reached at least 15 killed. It added with more than 580 arrests.
As part of our newspaper reading, we now present the day's death listings. If you need further information on any of these names, call us at 716-821-5555. Again, 716-821-5555. We have only one death listing today, and that is Blake, Lois J. Nee Herring. She's the wife of the late Robert Blake and the dearest mother of Kevin, Tim, Paul, and the late William and the late Robert Blake. We also have one obituary of national notice, and that's Richard Smallwood, who was a gospel singer and recording artist nominated 8 times for Grammy Awards, who died. His age was 77. If you need any further information on any of these names, call us at 716-821-5555. Again, 821-5555.
Well, now it's time to turn to Georgia Nichols Royal Stars, and if today is your birthday, happy birthday. You are innovative and fascinated by the unknown. You are empathetic and self-disciplined. This year, your creativity, zest, and desire for life are at a pinnacle. For the rest of us who aren't having a birthday today, the stars show the kind of a day you're going to have. 5 stars is a dynamic day, 4 stars is a positive day, 3 stars is average, and I'll say that we're all having 3 and 4 star days today. For Aries, it is a 4-star day. Today, you have a strong sense of everything being right with the world. You need to be yourself and to feel who you really are. When talking to others, you'll project yourself. Tonight, you should be playful. For us Taurians, it's a 3-star day. Today, you're happy to relax at home if you can pull this off, because you need to take refuge from the busyness of the world around you. Tonight, relax. Gemini, 4 stars. When talking to others today, or perhaps casting a glance about your daily world, you will be subjective. Everything will be from your point of view today. Tonight, discussions. Cancer, you're having a 3-star day. Today, the moon is in your money house, which makes you identify with your possessions. This is why you will feel happiest if you can be surrounded by familiar objects. Tonight, the word is check your money. For Leo, it is a 4-star day. Today, the moon is in your sign, which happens for 2.5 days every month. When this occurs, it heightens your emotions and makes you feel a greater need to relate to loved ones. Tonight, you are in charge. For Virgo, 3 stars. This is a playful, fun-loving time for you. Social outings, sports events, and fun activities with kids, plus romantic tete-a-tete are tops on your menu. Tonight, you should enjoy privacy. Libra, you're having a 4-star day. Friendships are important to you today, which is why you might feel more protective or supportive than usual to someone. The word for tonight is a warm connection with someone. For Scorpio, it's a 3-star day. Members of the public might know personal details about your private life for some reason. Think about this in case you have to do some damage control. Tonight, you're noticed. For Sagittarius, 4 stars. This day begins with an exciting energy. You're eager to explore your world. You want to learn new things, meet new people, and be inspired. So tonight, you should explore. For Capricorn, it's a 3-star day. Today, your emotional experiences will be more intense. You might feel possessive about property, especially something shared or very old and familiar. Tonight, you should check your finances. For Aquarius, 4 stars. Today, the moon is opposite your sign, which means you have to go more than halfway when dealing with others. It's not a big deal, but it might reduce conflicts. Tonight, you should cooperate with others. And finally, Pisces, it's a 3-star day. This is a positive day full of upbeat energy. You might have to put the interests of someone else before your own today and perform a service for them. Tonight, you should get organized.
And now let's take some highlights from what happened in history on this date. In 1896, an Austrian newspaper reported the discovery by German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen of a new type of radiation that came to be called the X-ray. In 1925, Democrat Nellie Taylor Ross of Wyoming took office as America's first female governor. In 1953, Samuel Beckett's 2-act tragic comedy Waiting for Godot, considered a classic of the theater of the absurd, premiered in Paris. In 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower proposed assistance to countries to help them resist communist aggression. In 1972, President Richard Nixon announced the Space Shuttle program, directing NASA to produce a reusable vehicle that would boost manned space exploration while bringing down its costs. The first shuttle then launched in 1981 and the last one in 2011. In 1980, Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang became the first hip-hop song to reach the Billboard Top 40, helping to popularize this emerging musical genre. And finally, in 2022, Australia denied entry to tennis star Novak Djokovic, who was seeking to play for the 10th Australian Open title later that month. They canceled his visa upon his arrival because he failed to meet the requirements for an exemption from the COVID-19 vaccination rules.
Well, now we have some items from our political notebook. First, from the District of Columbia, the FAA lifts its block on flights to the Caribbean. The Federal Aviation Administration on Sunday lifted its prohibition on flights to the Caribbean, and airlines have resumed normal flights. The original restrictions around the Caribbean airspace are expiring at 12 a.m. Eastern Time, and flights can resume, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy wrote on X. Airlines are informed and will update their schedules quickly. The FAA had restricted the airspace in the Caribbean and Venezuela due to military operations in the area by the Trump administration that included the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The measure was made via a NOTAM, or Notice to Airmen, which provides real-time information to airlines about changes or new hazards impacting flights. On Sunday, at Miami International Airport, more than a dozen flights had departed as of 11 a.m., according to the airport's tracker. 6 flights were canceled due to recovery from the airspace restrictions, Greg Chin, Communications Director for the Miami-Dade Aviation Department, told the Herald. On Saturday, 107 flights were canceled at Miami due to airspace restrictions, according to Chin. At Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, at least 14 flights have left from that airport to the region Sunday morning, according to the airport's flight tracker. On Sunday, American Airlines, which accounts for most overall flights from Miami, was also back up and running. American said that so far it has added nearly 5,000 additional seats to and from the region on top of resuming scheduled service on Sunday, January 4th. The FAA put a new advisory into the notice to pilots and airmen. Notices as a precautionary flight for flights around Caraco, San Juan, Malaquita, and Piarco flight information regions. They last until February 2nd. And finally, in Japan, Trump has extended an invitation to its new leader. Trump has invited Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi during a phone call to visit the United States this year, the Japanese Foreign Ministry said, in what would be the ultra-conservative leader's first trip to the United States since taking office in October.
You are listening to a reading of articles from the Buffalo News for Monday, January 5th on your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. We'll return for some more readings after this short break. And your readers today are
Ed Howard
and Ted Pajacki.
If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Siro, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you.
We'll continue now with our reading of articles from today's Buffalo News. Your readers are
Ted Pajacki.
And I'm Ed Howard, and we're going to turn now to the city and regional section of today's paper. And our first story is headlined, County Legislator Wants Bars to Provide Drink Lids Upon Request to Thwart Drink Spiking. In light of reports of college students unknowingly having their drinks spiked at bars, one local legislator has lent her support to an effort to require bars and nightclubs in New York to provide drink lids to any patrons that request it. California already passed such a law last year, but Erie County legislator Taisha St. Jean Tard is having a bit more difficulty getting people on board locally. Not only am I putting this resolution forward, but I'm also working with state representatives to see how we can carry this bill because it will be under their jurisdiction, St. Jean Tard said. She said that according to a survey, 1 out of 13 New York college students has reported unknowingly having their drinks spiked, in many cases affecting women who could become incapacitated and vulnerable to sexual assault. To prevent this, she wants the state to put a regulation in place requiring bars to give drink lids to customers who request one. But her resolution failed 7-4 last month, with all 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats voting against it, referencing concerns about the burden to struggling establishments. I believe this is a personal responsibility, legislator Lindsay Larigo, a Republican of West Seneca, said. It's so difficult to operate a business in Erie County as it is. We see downtown there are restaurants closing left and right across Erie County, in the suburbs, not just in the city. I think any sort of legislation calls to provide drink lids is not the direction we should be going, to add more difficulties and barriers and cost to local businesses. Of the 3 fellow Democrats who supported her resolution, 2 noted that they have daughters in their 20s and have deeper concerns about their safety. I know what it's like out there, said Chairman Timothy Myers, a Democrat of Cheektowaga, and there's some people that will take advantage of other people. Some bars and clubs in the state already provide drink lids voluntarily to patrons who request it to prevent would-be perpetrators from surreptitiously dropping drugs, particularly depressants, into other people's drinks. Verifying the frequency and impact of this behavior is difficult, though surveys of college students indicate it is an issue. Despite St. Jean Tard's failure to get her resolution adopted last month, she said she will continue to raise the issue and encourage members of the Western New York delegation to push the measure in the state legislature. She also said the cost to local businesses to buy drink lids in bulk is minimal, especially since the lids would only need to be provided on request. I think we have to put people first. Excuse me. Before dollars, she said. There.
That's emphatic. Next article is, New York gets $212 million from the feds for rural health. Is it enough to offset the Medicaid cuts? New York State will receive more than $212 million in 2026 under the Federal Rural Health Transformation Program, a multi-year fund added to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act after politicians from both sides of the aisle expressed concerns about how the bill's reduction in Medicaid spending would affect these struggling rural hospitals. Representative Nick Langworthy, a Republican who represents Buffalo suburbs and Southern Tier, called the funding a historic win for rural health care in New York. Rural hospitals are the backbone of health care in our community, said Langworthy, whose district includes several rural hospitals. For too long, many rural systems have faced mounting financial pressure, workforce shortages, and access challenges, forcing patients to travel farther for care. This investment helps to change that. But how much will it change the fate of rural hospitals will be the question. Many healthcare analysts say the 5-year $500 billion rural health transformation program will not be enough to offset the upcoming reduction in federal Medicaid spending, along with an expected rise in uncompensated care costs at hospitals that could see more uninsured patients. Rural hospitals have long struggled, facing stagnant patient volumes, unfavorable reimbursement models, recruiting challenges, and expensive building maintenance. Nationwide, 110 rural hospitals have closed, and another 85 have cut inpatient services since January of 2005. And according to the University of North Carolina's Cecil G. Shep Center for Health Services Research. Further, more than 300 rural hospitals across the country are considered at immediate risk of closing because of the severity of their financial problems, according to an August report from the Center for Healthcare Quality and Payment Reform. New York has 16 rural hospitals at immediate risk, trailing just Kansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas, according to the report, which found the hospitals at immediate risk had lost money delivering patient services over a multi-year period and had low financial reserves. Proponents of the Rural Health Transformation Program believe the fund will help, noting the initiative is the largest single rural health care investment in U.S. history. What happens next could have a big impact on New York's rural communities, which have about 1.2 million residents, or nearly 11% of the state's population. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act is expected to reduce federal Medicaid spending by about $1 trillion nationwide by 2034, with $137 billion of that decrease projected in rural areas, according to an analysis by health policy research organization KFF. The 5-year, $50 billion Rural Health Transformation Program represents nearly 37% of the projected cut to federal Medicaid spending in rural areas, according to KFF. Just looking at rural hospitals and not other rural health care providers, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is expected to reduce federal Medicaid spending on rural hospitals by $50.4 billion over a decade, according to the American Hospital Association. It's certainly not going to overcome the cuts, said Kevin Kerwin, the president and CEO of the Iroquois Healthcare Association, which is a trade organization that represents more than 50 hospitals and health systems in 32 upstate counties, the farthest west being Schuyler County in central New York. Among its membership, the group represents large teaching hospitals, but also some of the state's smallest rural hospitals, including Clifton Fine Hospital in St. Lawrence County, which in early 2025 became the first hospital in New York to be designated a rural emergency hospital. The designation aims to help rural hospitals maintain emergency services, observation care, and outpatient services by giving them higher Medicaid reimbursements. In Western New York, Westfield Memorial Hospital in Chautauqua County in early October received the Rural Emergency Hospital designation. Kerwin said nearly 2/3 of the association's members are operating below the operating margin of 3%, that many barely breaking even or operating in the red. Kerwin was pleased to see the federal government allot $212 million to New York, the 12th highest total of all the states, but questions how transformative the dollars will become of high need. For instance, If the money was divided evenly among 50 providers, that would be $4.24 million each. That's a good thing, but it's not nearly going to overcome the need, especially when you account for the funding costs, when they account for more people being uninsured. You're going to have more people going to the hospital without insurance, he said. Concerned about the federal changes, Kerwin penned a letter to Governor Kathy Hochul on Tuesday, urging the state to continue its commitment to health care in the upcoming state budget to avoid further destabilizing the industry.
Well, continuing with healthcare news, early site work is going to start soon on Kaleida's long-planned $223 million hospital in Fredonia. Early site work on Kaleida Health's planned $223 million hospital in Fredonia should start soon, now that the health systems project has received contingent approval from the state health department. While more approvals are needed, the contingent approval for the Northern Chautauqua Hospital project paves the way for Kaleida's contractors to begin excavating and grading the site on January 12th. Kaleida doesn't yet have approval to start hard construction such as foundation and steel work, but the contingent approval still gets things rolling on a project that will take 32 to 36 months to complete. The contingent approval received December 23rd comes after Kaleida and Dunkirk-based Brooks TLC Hospital System in early November submitted an application to the health department to build the one-story, 133,000 square foot hospital at 412 East Main Street in Fredonia. A new hospital in northern Chautauqua County has been in the works since Kaleida and Brooks affiliated in the spring of 2016, but the project's future was not secure until June 2024, when Governor Kathy Hochul visited SUNY Fredonia and promised that $74 million in long-ago awarded state funding for the hospital would finally be paid out. Of the $74 million in state grant funding, nearly $70.5 million remains and will be used for the project, according to Kaleida's 455-page application to the state. In addition, the application notes that Kaleida is seeking $125 million in housing and urban development financing through KeyBank, with $75 million to be used for the hospital project and the remaining $50 million to be used for a separate ongoing conversion of Kaleida's electronic health record to Epic Systems. Kaleida, which has system-wide annual operating revenue of $2.5 billion, also plans to use about $77.6 million in cash equity from its balance sheet for the hospital. The health system already purchased the land of former Grape Vineyard for the project for $733,000. The new hospital is designed to have 15 medical surgical beds with 5 observation beds, an emergency department capacity of 16 bays, clinic space for primary care and specialty services, 3 operating rooms, 3 procedure rooms, a full imaging suite, and a pharmacy, laboratory, and other support services. The hospital will also have a helipad for emergency patient transfers. In its application, Kaleida estimates that nearly 262,000 visits to the hospital in the first year. That includes 168,000 visits for laboratory services, about 37,000 for imaging and diagnostic tests, 19,200 for the emergency department, about 16,800 for primary care, around 7,800 for medical specialty visits, nearly 5,000 for multi-specialty visits, more than 3,700 for wound care, about 3,400 for infusions, and more than 700 for observation services. While the current Brooks Hospital in Dunkirk, built in 1942 and expanded in 1962, is licensed for 65 beds, only 24 are staffed, and occupancy often ranges from 12 to 22 patients, according to the Health Equity Impact Assessment for the new hospital project. The adjustment to 15 beds at the new hospital, the assessment notes, is a shift to meet future community needs. While Brooks Hospital has 9 emergency bays, the new hospital will have 16 emergency bays for increased access, according to the assessment. The Health Equity Impact Assessment, conducted by Pittsford-based MP Care Solutions, noted that the project represents a major reconfiguration of an acute care hospital to ensure long-term viability in an underserved area. It's a shift that many other areas have gone through before, most recently in Western New York, when Eastern Niagara Hospital closed and Catholic Health System opened Lockport Memorial Hospital to fill the void.
You are listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service, and the time is 15 minutes after the hour. And now we turn to the sports section. And the sports section has a huge headline. It just says, Fond Farewell. And I've got to let you know that it's the largest section of today's news, and we can only give you about 10%, a fraction of all the articles that are here. And we're going to start with this article by Lance Lisowski. It's titled, In a Flawed AFC Field, the Bills might be the best. The speakers inside Highmark Stadium blared Iris by Buffalo's beloved alternative rock band, the Goo Goo Dolls, as the Bills and New York Jets walked toward the tunnel at the East End Zone on Sunday night. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be, and I don't want to go home right now. Bills long snapper Reed Ferguson, the team's longest tenured player, stopped near midfield and turned to the lower bowl for one last look at the thousands of fans who stuck around to watch the final moments of the final game in the 53-year history of the team's home. Tre'Davious White, a veteran cornerback who returned this season for a second stint with Buffalo, watched from the end zone as the team played a commemorative video. We wanted to send it out the right way, and we did, Ferguson said, after the Bills finished their regular season with a 35-8 win over the New York Jets. The party on Abbott Road continued well into the night on the tailgate lots surrounding the stadium and the bars all across Western New York. The celebration would not last long for any of the Bills, though, because they've got a game next week, and here are some of the details. The Bills will be playing in a AFC wildcard playoff game as the number 6 seeded Buffalo Bills, whose record is 12-5, will play at the number 3 seed Jacksonville Jaguars, whose record is 13-4. And that game will take place at 1 p.m. next Sunday down in Everbank Stadium in Jacksonville, Florida. The game will be able to be watched on CBS TV, which is WIVB Channel 4 here in Buffalo. And on the radio, it'll be on the Bills Radio Network, which is GRAM 55. And the call on those games on the radio will be Chris Brown, Eric Wood, and Sal Capaccio. Sean McDermott, the Bills coach, explained to players why the home finale was so important to the franchise. The equipment staff helped McDermott procure a ball cap that resembled the one worn by Marv Levy. But McDermott's focus had to shift to the playoffs as soon as he reached his office after the game. The Bills, 12-5, clinched the 6th seed in the AFC, which sets up a matchup on the road with the 3rd-seeded Jacksonville Jaguars. Buffalo reached 12 wins for the 3rd time in 5 seasons and finished the regular season with a 7-2 record at home. We're going to have to be a tough football team, McDermott said. That's where it starts. You can't beat yourself. There's more to it than that, but it's an important week for us, obviously, and we have a lot of work to do. Josh Allen didn't need to throw a pass for the Bills to embarrass the floundering Jets. James Cook ran only twice for 15 yards, giving the Bills running back at least a chance to become the first Buffalo player since 1976 to win the NFL rushing title. 4 of the Bills' 5 starting offensive linemen sat out as a precaution. Several other prominent players watched from the sidelines, resting for the playoffs. The gap between one of the NFL's basement dwellers and a perennial contender could not have been wider. The Bills totaled 470 yards, 30 first downs, and averaged 6.5 yards per play, while holding the Jets to only 122 yards. There are going to be no more easy matchups, though. The degree of difficulty will soon increase exponentially. The Bills know what to expect. This is their 7th consecutive trip to the postseason. But this team comes with some notable questions as it prepares to hit the road. Will the injury to Allen's foot limit him in the game? Will the Bills respond well if they can't run the ball? Can their run defense improve? Can they trust the kicking game with Matt Prater injured again? Is there enough depth at cornerback with Maxwell Harrison injuring his ankle? And above all, can the Bills win on the road? They have not won a road playoff game in McDermott's 9 seasons. 3 of Buffalo's 5 losses this season happened away from Orchard Park, and ultimately they cost the Bills a chance to prolong the farewell to Highmark Stadium. They have won 5 of their last 6 games, with the exception being a 13-12 loss at home to the reigning Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. It's a surreal feeling, right guard Osiris Torrance said. We practice all year since fall camp to be in this situation that we're in the playoffs right here, right now. It's a good feeling, but it's a surge of urgency too. We know it's play for keeps now. The Bills were initially 1.5-point road favorites against the Jaguars, but Jacksonville will be a popular upset pick this week. Jacksonville won 8 games in a row to capture the AFC South title. During that span, the Jaguars had a plus 153-point differential, and their quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, threw 19 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. Their run defense is the best in the NFL. They are a talented team that should not be underestimated.
Well, it seems to me that we can expect a lot of Bills fans to be in the stadium coming from all over Florida for that game, too. So might be closer to a home game for the Bills. Turning next to Jay Skursky's column, his headline is, Cook's cameo appearance paves the way to a rushing title. James Cook went into Sunday's game against the New York Jets as the NFL's rushing leader. The Buffalo Bills' 4th-year running back padded his lead with 2 carries for 15 yards during the Bills' 35-8 victory at Highmark Stadium. Cook then had to play the waiting game. His season total of 1,621 yards was 152 yards ahead of the Ravens' Derrick Henry, who closed out the regular season against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday night in a game that decided the AFC North title. It is what it is, Cook said after the Bills' win. If he get it, he get it. He didn't get it. Cook barely held on to become the Bills' first running back since 1976 to win the rushing title. O.J. Simpson did it that year, his 4th and final crown, meaning no other running back in team history had led the NFL in rushing. Clearly, it was important to both Cook and the team for him to get a chance to win it. It would mean a lot, said Cook, whose brother Dalvin, of the NFL reasons, something that nobody in my family has done, something nobody here has done in a long time, so, it would be special. Cook campaigned for more playing time, but he knew he probably wasn't going to get it. As a running back, that's everybody's goal, to win a rushing title, he said. The conundrum for Bills coach Sean McDermott was straightforward. The longer Cook stayed on the field, the more he risked an injury, and that's something the team absolutely could not afford ahead of its AFC wildcard game at 1 p.m. Sunday in Jacksonville. I'm sure if he got hurt, people would probably make me walk home, McDermott said. That was part of the give and take of the week of, okay, how long do we go? Initially, McDermott told defensive coordinator Joe Brady to give Cook the first quarter. As the game approached, however, McDermott started to feel like a quarter was going to be too much. So, I'm probably not a great gambler in the casinos, the coach joked. Cook's chances got a boost when the Colts' Jonathan Taylor was held to 26 yards on 14 carries against the Texans earlier in the day. Taylor entered Week 18 just 47 yards behind Cook, but he failed to mount much of a charge. I pray that he wins and deserves it, McDermott said. Felt like if we could get him to 150, somewhere in 150 in terms of the spread between him and Derrick Henry, and we'll see. Did the best we could in trying to be fair to James, and yet take care and be fair to the team as well.
Well, most of the game yesterday was played by the backups who have been sitting on the bench watching, so we have to give them a grade. And here's the report card for those students who watched the Bills throughout this season. The running game, A+. How's this for a stat? Ray Davis had 151 yards rushing against the Steelers. He came into this game with 124 rushing yards for the season. His performance was a reminder for the Bills and the rest of the league. Davis can play. Getting him more carries proved to be a challenge because of how good James Cook was all season. But give Davis a ton of credit for making the most of his opportunity. The passing game, A+. Mitchell Trubisky went off. Seriously, the Bills' backup quarterback torched the Jets, going 22 of 29 for 259 yards and 4 touchdowns. A passer rating of 142.1. That's a fairly absurd stat line. And also, it's an exhibit why the Jets completely quit on the season. But that's beside the point. The run defense, A+. It bears repeating. The Jets were an absolute train wreck of a team. Nevertheless, give the Bills' run defense credit. It held New York to 69 yards on 23 carries, an average of just 3 yards per rush. Fourth-string running back Khalil Herbert led the Jets with 42 yards on 12 carries. New York's longest run was just 7 yards. Pass defense, A+. Rookie defensive tackle T.J. Sanders earned his first career sack. The Bills finished with 2 passes defensed, one by safety Darnell Savage and one by defensive end A.J. Epinesa, who was one of the few starting caliber defensive players who saw significant playing times. The Bills limited Jets rookie quarterback Brady Cook to just 60 yards passing as he completed 11 of 22 attempts. Special teams, A-. Matt Prater made 3 extra points in the first half before leaving the game when his quad injury flared up. Clearly, that's a big concern heading into next week. Mitch Wisnowski didn't have to punt even once. Ray Davis's lone kickoff return went for 22 yards, and he ended up leading the NFL this season in kickoff return yardage, which is impressive given that he wasn't even expected to have that job coming into this season. And finally, coaching. It's an A. Sean McDermott was in a no-win situation as it pertained to playing time for Cook. It would have been nice to have seen him pad his rushing lead, but if Cook got hurt, that would have been a disaster. It would also have been nice to see Josh Allen get his 40th touchdown of the season to extend that streak to 6 straight seasons of at least that many. But once Allen left the game, it was clear he wasn't coming back in. Now, the coach wore that throwback hat in his post-game press conference, saying he did that as a tribute to Marv Levy. McDermott gets it. He understands why the Bills are so important to this community. That might not mean much if he doesn't win a Super Bowl with McDermott, but the coach handled the final game at Highmark Stadium with a ton of dignity and grace.
Well, there are other games and teams besides the Bills, particularly the Sabres. And here is Mike Harrington's column, which is headlined "Stopped Cold." After record attempt fails, Sabres need to focus on starting a new streak. Assistant coach Marty Wilford can stop wearing the same suit with the brown jacket, tie, and pants and send it to the dry cleaners. Defenseman Owen Power won't read the pregame starting lineup anymore, and poor Jason Zucker, who couldn't return to the ice even though he was healthy because you can't mess with a winning roster, can be expected back in the lineup pronto. Any superstitions that propped up the Buffalo Sabres during their 10-game win streak can get pushed aside. Now it's time to decide how they'll respond to an end of an historic run that resurrected their season and finally gave the tortured fan base real hope that this 14-year playoff drought might end come April. The dam broke on the Sabres streak Saturday afternoon in Nationwide Arena with a relatively lifeless 5-1 loss to the Columbus Blue Jackets. But in the minutes after the defeat before a sellout crowd of 18,809, there was an immediate resolve not to let one loss become two. Response was the buzzword. The focus was already on Tuesday night in KeyBank Center against the Vancouver Canucks. This game was tossed in the trash, exactly where it belonged. That's the most important part. It has nothing to do with winning 10 more anymore, said Lindy Ruff. Now it's about not losing 2 in a row, about responding to the game we just played, going back in our building and playing a good hockey game. We didn't look like ourselves, Captain Rasmus Dahlin said of a game where the Sabres were charged with 21 giveaways, missed on a season-high 34 of their 82 shot attempts, gave up a shorthanded goal, and went 0 for 5 on the power play. It was a rough homecoming for new general manager Jarmo Kekalainen and the new assistant GM Josh Flynn, who watched from a booth high above the ice in the same arena where they both spent more than a decade with the Blue Jackets. They were briefly honored on the Jumbotron in the first period, but Kekalainen soon returned to watching his team lose for the first time in 8 games under his watch. The GM obviously knew not to touch the roster other than if an injury hit, but now he's free to tinker as he sees fit, and it will be plenty interesting to see how the next 2 months play out in that department.
You are listening to a reading of today's Buffalo News on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The time is 33 minutes after the hour. And now we turn to Asking Eric. And the headline is, Boyfriend Spends So Much Time with Ex-Wife's Family. Dear Eric, my boyfriend is of almost 2 years. Seems unable to break away from his former spouse's family. That marriage lasted 15 years. There were no children, so he has virtually no contact with his wife. However, he seems unwilling to refuse any invitation from the family to have dinner, lunch, and go on weekend trips to their Bay house. Initially, I went along with him as I was invited, but I got tired of hearing about the ex-wife from her family, so I started saying no. I have expressed my displeasure many times, so my boyfriend will just join them and without me. When I was out of town visiting family for 2 weeks, my boyfriend revealed to me that he had been with the family 4 times in less than 1 week. When he mentioned joining them for the Thanksgiving meal, he knew from my reaction that I was not happy about it. Is there any advice for me going forward? If he knows I don't like his doing that, it seems like he would stop. And it's signed, Confused. And Eric replies, Dear Confused, I wouldn't go so far as to say your boyfriend should stop doing something like this just because you don't like it. But the questions you're raising should prompt him to give you a little more insight into what he's thinking. Even though many people, if not most, don't maintain the same level of closeness to their in-laws after a divorce, obviously, the people in this situation feel differently. They were in each other's lives for 15 years, so one can see the logic, I suppose. I can't help but wonder where the ex-wife is in all of this, though. Is she hanging out with the family, or is your boyfriend chilling with her folks while she's off somewhere else? Ultimately, though, this is about you and your boyfriend. When you share your displeasure about him going over to his ex-in-law's house, he should be sharing with you what this relationship means to him and why it's important that he keep it up. You certainly don't have to accept his reasoning. These hangouts can be non-negotiables for you that put an end to the relationship. But it is noteworthy that, from your letter, there's nothing inappropriate going on there. The biggest issue listed was that a woman's family was talking about her, which isn't all that outrageous. Maybe it's best to accept that these people are part of your boyfriend's life. The next letter. Dear Eric, my brother-in-law, never known for his tact or diplomacy, came to our house for Thanksgiving dinner, where we had 15 people in attendance. Getting everything on the table in time is always a challenge, but each year people show up, eat, drink, and are merry. This year, my brother-in-law announced twice, in a loud and caring voice, "This turkey's ice cold." It was not piping hot because it got pulled out of the oven to get carved and to make way for everything else that had to go into the oven, and because of all the items that the other guests showed up with that needed to be heated. But it was not cold. He then left early, telling me the dinner was too crowded. I was angry. My husband was angry. He sent my brother-in-law a text the next day about it. My brother-in-law responded that I was taking it on too much for dinner, which is actually kind of rich coming from him because he hasn't hosted anything in years. I saw him the same weekend for another family function. It was a catered function held elsewhere, and he came right over to tell me all that had gone wrong with the dinner. I said nope and refused to engage with him. I've told my husband I'm not having him over again unless he apologizes. My husband thinks I'm being unrealistic. Any thoughts? And it's signed, "Quitting him cold turkey." And Eric replies, "Dear Quitting, kudos to you for not dumping the not ice cold turkey right into his lap. He absolutely owes you an apology. It sounds like he's dealing with mental or emotional issues that are impacting his ability to respond appropriately. You suggest that he's always been like this. So when your husband says you're being unrealistic, maybe he's saying, well, you know how he is. What can be done?" But there's a big difference between knowing that a relative is a pill and loving them through it, and being rudely insulted by a relative and just sucking it up. You don't have to accept it. There are consequences for our actions, and it is realistic to hold other adults accountable when they act out. Your brother-in-law is not behaving like someone who wants to continue being invited over. Until he apologizes, he can eat his own turkey at whatever temperature he desires.
Well, turning now to some world news from the Middle East. The headline is International Aid Groups Grapple with Israeli Ban. Israel's decision to revoke the licenses of more than 36 humanitarian organizations this week has aid groups scrambling to grapple with what this means for their operations in Gaza and their ability to help tens of thousands of struggling Palestinians. The 37 groups represent some of the most prominent of the more than 100 independent non-government organizations working in Gaza alongside United Nations agencies. Those banned include Doctors Without Borders, the Norwegian Refugee Council, Oxfam, and Medical Aid for Palestinians. The groups do everything from providing tents and water to supporting clinics and medical facilities. The overall impact, however, remains unclear. And the most immediate impact of the license revocation is that Israel will no longer allow the groups to bring supplies into the Gaza Strip or send international staffers into the territory. Israel says all suspended groups will have to halt their operations by March 1st. Some groups have already been barred from bringing in aid. The Norwegian Refugee Council said it has not been allowed to bring in supplies in 10 months, leaving it distributing tents and aid brought in by other groups. Israel says the banned groups make up only a small part of the aid operations in Gaza. The ban further strains aid operations even as Gaza's over 2 million Palestinians still face humanitarian crisis more than 12 weeks into the ceasefire. The UN says that although famine has been staved off, more than a quarter of families still eat only one meal a day, and food prices remain out of reach for many. More than 1 million people need better tents as winter storms lash the territory. Israel recently introduced strict new registration requirements for aid agencies working in Gaza. Most notably, it required groups to provide the names and personal details of local and international staff and said it would ban groups for a long list of criticisms of Israel. The registration process is overseen by Israel's Ministry for Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, led by a far-right member of the ruling Likud party. Israel says the rules aim to prevent Hamas and other militants from infiltrating the groups, something it said was happening throughout the 2-year-old war. The UN, which leads the massive aid program in Gaza, and independent groups deny the allegations and Israeli claims of major diversion of aid supplies by Hamas. Aid organizations say they did not comply in part because they feared that handing over staff information could endanger them. More than 500 aid workers have been killed in Gaza during the war, according to the United Nations. Israel denies targeting aid workers, but the groups say Israel has been vague about how it would use the data. Demanding staff lists as a condition for access to territory is an outrageous overreach, Doctors Without Borders, known by its French acronym MSF, said Friday. A December report on MSF issued by the Israeli government team recommended rejection of the group's license. It pointed to statements by the group criticizing Israel, including referring to its campaign in Gaza as genocide and calling its months-long ban on food entering the territory this year as, quote, a starvation tactic. It said the statements violated neutrality and constituted delegitimization of Israel.
Also in world news from Nigeria, at least 30 die in attack. At least 30 villagers were killed and several others missing after gunmen raided a village in northern Nigeria's Niger state, police said on Sunday, the latest in a cycle of deadly violence in the conflict-hit region. The gunmen stormed the Kasuwan Daji village in the Borgu local government area on Saturday night and opened fire on their residents. They also razed the local market and several houses, state police spokeswoman Wasiu Abiodun said in a statement. At least 2 residents put the death toll at 37 and said it could be much higher, as some people remained missing as of Sunday. Locals also said the security forces are yet to arrive in the area contradicting a police claim that they had deployed officers to search for those who were kidnapped. The Reverend Father Stephen Kabirarat, a spokesman for the Catholic Church of Cantagora Diocese, where the attack happened, told local media that the gunmen killed more than 40 people and abducted several others, including children. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu condemned the attack and said he has directed security officials to hunt down the gunmen and rescue the hostages. Those terrorists have tested the resolve of our country and its people, Tinubu said in a statement. They must face the full consequences of their criminal actions, no matter who they are or what their intent is. They must be hunted down. In addition, those who aid, abet, or enable them will also be brought to justice. The gunmen had been lurking around nearby communities for about a week before the attack, according to one resident who asked not to be named for fear of his safety. Now, survivors are too afraid to go recover the bodies. The bodies are there in the village. If we don't see any security, how can we go there? The residents said, adding that the attack lasted for up to 3 hours. Such attacks are common in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, where dozens of rogue gangs seeking control often target remote communities with limited security and government presence. The attack on Kasuwan-Daji village happened near the Papiri community, where more than 300 school children and their teachers were kidnapped from a Catholic school in November. The attackers who raided Kasuwan-Daji arrived from the National Park Forest along Kabi District, according to the police, pointing to the usual trend where abandoned, expansive forest reserves act as hideouts for these armed gangs.
Well, in Switzerland, a silent march was held to honor victims of a New Year's Eve fire in a bar where 40 people were killed and more than 100 injured. Hundreds marched in silence Sunday to honor the victims of the New Year's Eve fire at a bar in the Swiss alpine resort of Crans, Montana, which left 40 dead and many severely injured. Somber mourners, many with reddened eyes, filed silently out of the chapel to organ music after the hour-long Mass at the Chapelle Saint-Christophe in Crans, Montana. Some exchanged hugs before marching up a hill to Le Constellation Bar. Many hundreds of people walked in the dense, snaking procession in the bright sunlight past shuttered stores. Up on the mountain overlooking the town, snow machines sent plumes of white flakes into the air. At the top of the street in front of Le Constellation, which is still largely shielded from view by white screens, the swelling crowd stood in near total silence, some weeping. Then they broke into sustained applause for the rescue teams and police who rushed to the scene of horror, their hands in gloves and mittens against the cold. Mourners and well-wishers deposited bouquets at a makeshift memorial piled with flowers, cuddly toys, and other tributes. Some firefighters wiped their eyes, too. Through this tragic event, I believe we must all remember that we are all brothers and sisters in humanity, Veronique Barras, a local resident who knows grieving families, said. It's important to support each other, to hug each other, and to move forward towards light. Kathy Premer said her daughter was out celebrating her 17th birthday on New Year's Eve when she called in the early hours of the morning to say she was stuck because the Le Constellation was cordoned off. For the young, but even for adults, it's hard to understand things that seem inexplicable, she said. They went there to party. It's a destination for December 31st. It's very festive. There were people of many nationalities, and it all turned into tragedy. In the crowd, Paola Ponte Greppi, an 80-year-old Italian who has a house in Crans, Montana, called for safety checks in bars. We need more safety in these places because it's not the only place like this. Why didn't the town do proper checks? For me, that's terrible. During the Mass, the Reverend Gilles Cavan spoke of the terrible uncertainty for families unsure if their loved ones are among the dead or still alive among the injured. There are no words strong enough to express the dismay, anguish, and anger of those who are affected in their lives today, and yet here we are, gathered because silence alone is not enough, he said. In the crowded pews, a grieving woman listened intently, her hands clasped tightly and sometimes clasping rosary beads as speakers delivered readings in German, French, and Italian. 40 people died and 119 were injured in the blaze, which broke out about 1:30 a.m. on Thursday in the Constellation Bar. Police said many of the victims were in their teens to mid-20s. By Sunday evening, Swiss authorities had identified all of the 40 fatalities.
And we'll close our broadcast today with some news briefs from around the nation and the world. And in California, forecasters are warning of more rain in soaked California. Crews cleared mud from key California highways as forecasters warned on Sunday that more thunderstorms were on their way after downpours and high tides caused flooding, road closures, and rescues of people trapped in cars. 5 northern counties remained under a flood watch, with up to 3 inches of rain possible through Monday night in areas that have been drenched off and on since around Christmas, said the National Weather Service office in Eureka. To the south, near the San Francisco Bay Area, waters were slowly receding after roadways from Salcedo to San Rafael were flooded during heavy rain that coincided with record-breaking king tides. Such tides occur when the moon is in its closest position to the earth, creating a stronger gravitational pull. Some people kayaked along swamped streets, while others waded through waters above their knees. Authorities were called to assist when cars got stuck in water as high as 3 to 4 feet. Marin County Sheriff's Department said on Saturday. The Sergeant Michael Dobbins said, "I've been here for King's Tides, but I've never seen it this high. Never." A man died after he was swept into a creek during the storm, the sheriff's office said on Saturday. From Ukraine, 2 people were killed in Ukraine drone strikes in Russian border regions, local officials said Saturday ahead of peace talks to end the nearly 4-year-old war in Paris this week. Belgorod Region Governor Vyacheslav Gadov said 1 person died and 2 others, including a young child, were wounded when a Ukrainian drone struck a car. In North Korea, a missile test. They launched a multiple ballistic missiles toward the eastern waters on Sunday. Its neighbors said just hours before South Korea's president left for China for talks expected to cover North Korea's nuclear program. From Germany, many households and businesses in Berlin, Germany face days without electricity after high-voltage power lines were damaged by a fire that city authorities said Sunday was a result of a politically motivated attack by left-wing extremists. In Syria, Britain and France carried out a joint airstrike late Saturday in central Syria on an underground facility where members of the Islamic State group are suspected to have stored weapons and explosives. The 2 countries are part of the U.S.-led coalition that has been fighting ISIS militants for more than a decade. And finally, from Nigeria, A passenger boat capsized late Saturday in northern Nigeria's Yobe State, leaving at least 25 people dead and 14 others missing, emergency services said on Saturday. 13 were rescued, the officials said.
Well, we're going to close here with a quote. And in this Bills time here, the quote comes from Michael Jordan. And he said, "Do you know what my favorite part of the game is? It's the opportunity to play." And I guess we could say that our favorite part of the playoffs is going to be the opportunity to be in the playoffs.
Yes,
and so we'll see how things go when we rejoin you next week at this time. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo News for Monday, January 5th. We read from the Buffalo News live on weekday and Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. and rebroadcast at 4 p.m. For more information, call 716-821-5555. Your readers today have been
Ted Pajacki
and Ed Howard, and we thank you for listening.
If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for Radio Reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio Reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 14227. Any questions on Dash's tapes for radio reading? Call us at 716-821-5555, and thanks for caring.
Coming up next, the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service with the New York Times Magazine. Following that at noon is the USA Today. Stay with us.
following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,